take a deep breath. You're going to be okay. These were the common things that I would say to my kids when I was raising them, when I could see that their world was kind of starting to close in on them a little bit. Maybe it was that they couldn't find their other shoe and we were getting ready to walk out the door to go to school. Um, Maybe it was that they had had plans after high school and those didn't work out exactly with the way they had hoped they would. Um, Maybe they had crashed on their bike and skinned their knee up and were in the worst pain of their life. The point was that in each of these situations, I wanted them to know that they could regain control of their emotions and of their reactions if they would be purposeful about it. Oftentimes, that comment was just take a deep breath. You're going to be okay. And they learned to do that. I've shared those same words with family. I've shared them with friends. I've shared them most of all with myself when I was going through challenging things. I'd have to stop and remind myself, you're okay. Take a deep breath. I can't even tell you how useful that's been throughout the course of my life to just remember those simple words. And if they're good for a 4-year-old, they're probably just as good for a 40-year-old.
I would say so. I used something similar for many years, and it was just breathe. That was something that I had to remind myself of because I would find myself holding my breath. And that reminder to just breathe brought me back to where I was and helped me just kind of slow down and stop freaking out.
I think one of the things that I try to remember is that chaos is inevitable. That's a guarantee in life. That things are going to get crazy, things are going to get wild. And I think one of the biggest lies that we tell ourselves as adults is, oh, things are going to calm down. And I realized they never will. So I think not just recognizing, but embracing that there's going to be chaos, but we have an opportunity and maybe even an obligation to practice controlling our reactions to those moments. And sometimes we're better at it, sometimes we're not as great at it, but we have that power within ourselves to just breathe.
Right. And I think the more that you practice it, the easier it becomes to do it. In fact, I know that that's the case.
I think on a very practical level, and even though I kind of jokingly said, take a deep breath, that is something that has been so useful to me throughout my life. And I think it was helpful to my kids. I don't know. We'll find out when they all get to be adults. But it was just stopping and literally, practically making sure I'm taking in enough oxygen to feed my brain. And it's the same thing you said, just breathe. Like we hold our breath or we start having shallow breaths and we get panicky. And that is informing our brain and our central nervous system. Whereas if we will take a moment to stop and take a few deep cleansing breaths, it's informing our central nervous system that everything is okay, that we're safe, and that there's no imminent danger. So, on a very practical level, that's one simple thing that we can all do in the midst of any chaotic situation. It's free, it doesn't take any special training, and I think it's very effective.
I agree 100%. That was something that I actually had my doctor tell me because she's the one that noticed that I was always holding my breath and I was having a lot of anxiety and I was actually having panic attacks too. And it started with my not breathing, and just learning how to take those deep breaths really made a difference.
Another thing that I think has been super helpful for me is to be mindful. And we've talked about mindfulness in previous episodes, but to be mindful of the peaceful moments in my life, because sometimes you're going through a rough patch or spell, and maybe that's years long, but there are bound to be peaceful moments in there. And I think it's important for us to pay attention and recognize those peaceful moments, not be dismissive of them. We're not going to notice them. Our brains are way more attuned to negative information than they are to positive information, because that's what keeps us safe. We have to learn from negative things to try and avoid them in the future. Um, but those positive and peaceful moments, maybe it's just watching a sunrise. Maybe it's just a quiet moment where everything's okay. Training our brain to recognize that peace, take it in and appreciate it, I think it helps us to get through those more chaotic moments, because you know that that's not going to be forever.
Sounds a lot like gratitude. And that is something that Lance and I practiced throughout our marriage, and it helped so much. And it definitely gave us peace.
Something else that I think aligns very much with gratitude is just speaking truth and positivity to yourself, and recognizing the good things in your life. Sometimes just having written reminders around something like a mantra, I guess, that says, you've done hard things. Remember when you did this? Yesterday was a good day, or last week or last month or wherever you had this really amazing day. And maybe write that down, maybe post it somewhere where you can see it, or maybe hear something inspiring that motivates you. Speaking truth into your life and verbalizing, I would even say out loud, good things, I think that has a positive effect on your mindset.
And that's something that I do too. I have little post-it notes all over the house. I had them all the years that I cared for Lance, but this is a practice that I've been doing for many, many years, even before I was caring for Lance. And as I move forward, it has been so helpful for me to have those little mantras, those little positive messages, just to reinforce that I am doing things to move forward, that I am making it, that I am succeeding. And I look at those every day. I have a whole wall of them, and I'll pull one down and I'll just leave it in a spot in my house for a couple of weeks, maybe a few weeks. And I look at it every time I walk by, and I read it out loud, and it really does make a difference. And it can change my attitude if I'm having a bad day. So that's a really great thing to do. And I do have several friends who do that as well.
I love all your little post-it notes. One other thing that I hear a lot, and I learned this years ago, is to be very careful with the words always and never. And that was important in, I would say, in relationship with someone else, but also to yourself, to be very careful that you don't say things like, you never do that, or you always do that, in a way that's negative, because A, that's probably not true. And B, you're just reinforcing a false belief in your own head. And when you reinforce those false beliefs, it makes it so much harder for you to speak truth and find peace in those chaotic moments. The truth is, it may change someday. So saying this is never going to change, it's always going to be this hard, that's not true.
You've just convinced yourself that this is the way it's always going to be.
It's just not true. Nobody's life has been the same forever.
I think that these are all really great tips. I do think that it's really important. I'd like to add something to those. You know, Lance and I, in the beginning of his disability, we had a lot of negative people in our life. And we had a pretty positive outlook on life despite everything that we were going through. But as things started getting harder and harder, having those negative people in our life just dragged us down so much, it made it nearly impossible for us to be positive. And so, what we ended up having to do was get rid of all of those negative relationships so that we could continue to live a positive life and see the good things in our life. And I can't even tell you what a difference that made. Cutting out all of that negativity, all of those toxic relationships enabled us to get back to that positive mindset and the peace that we had been missing. So I just wanted to point that out. I think that that's really important when you are going through an incredibly stressful situation, especially that surrounding yourself with positive, supportive, uplifting people is going to make all the difference.
That makes perfect sense because I think those negative people or even just toxic people are bringing more chaos and stress into your life. So I wouldn't say it's simple because changing relationships with people is not simple, but it is maybe very necessary. If you're trying to get through the next day, the last thing you need is people around you who are bringing in more chaos, more drama, more stress, and putting that on you when you already have a very stressful life. And I think for me, I have a bit of a guilty complex. Like I feel bad ending relationships with people that don't serve me well. So that was something that was very hard for me. And I carried a lot of relationships on my back for years that were so damaging to me. So I think that's really, really good advice. Quit worrying about hurting people's feelings, quit worrying about losing a relationship, and focus on the task in front of you, which is caring for the people that you love.
And it was not easy for me to do that either. I don't carry guilt when I let go of relationships that are not serving me because I don't feel like we are meant to be in everybody's life all the time. That's just not something that I've ever believed. But Lance had a really hard time with it. And so I had to be very careful. And it took a lot of thought and a lot of conversations with him and with our counselors before we were able to separate ourselves from those relationships. So I'm not saying that it's easy, but I am saying that that was the key to peace for us was, or beginning to get the peace back, was getting rid of those toxic relationships. And something else that I did too was stop accommodating everyone else. We had so many people trying to dictate to us what we needed to do in our life to accommodate them, but we were the ones living that life. We were the ones that had to do this 24/7. And so I didn't have the energy, and it's not fair for other people to put those expectations on someone who is struggling so much. So I just stopped accommodating people. And that was another thing that made such a big difference for us. And that helped me to look at our life just as the two of us, because at the end of the day, it was just the two of us, and we needed to do what was right for us.
That is all such good insight. I think that's good for any situation, any relationship, to not hang on to um, things, people, situations, jobs, places that aren't serving your goals. Like being willing to let those things go that are bringing more chaos into your life, that are bringing more drama into your life. It's scary. It's terrifying. But in the end, as you get further down the road, you go, oh my gosh, why didn't I do that sooner? What was I thinking? Because it's scary. It's scary. So I think that's really, really good advice to be paying extra close attention to your relationships. One thing that I think is very, very important to add in this conversation is something that maybe seems very obvious, but I think is often so overlooked. And it's maybe one of the simplest things we can do, sort of like breathing, is just paying attention to our own well being. Are you eating well? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting enough sunshine? Like, does this particular moment feel extra chaotic because your blood sugar's low or you're dehydrated or you haven't been outside in 5 days or you're just tired? Perhaps your sense of feeling overwhelmed by this particular thing is just because you need a new perspective. And that's going to come with, like I said, improved sleep, staying hydrated, and making sure that your blood sugar isn't getting low. Such simple things. And I think sometimes we think like, oh, it couldn't possibly be that simple. And so often it is literally that simple. So I think it's worth mentioning.
And it is, I would agree that it is that simple, because those were the very things that I managed for Lance and myself every single day. That was the core of where we started our day and the things that I looked at throughout the day to make sure that each day was as good as it could be. And it was off when any of those things were off.
I also want to add in that, well, I think that being outside is just maybe one of the most powerful things. There's something extremely healing to me about just being outside of my house. And I think when I was younger, I really just wanted the sun on my face all the time. That was what I would feel compelled to go outside and experience. But as I've gotten older, I've found that even being outside when it's super windy or it's cold or it's raining, even, that does something to my senses that I cannot get anywhere else. And it's like this fantastic reset to my brain, to my emotions. It reconnects me with the core of who I am. And I think it helps give me perspective. So even just stepping outside for 5 minutes, I think can have tremendous benefit on your perspective.
That's something else I agree with. Lance and I loved being outdoors, and I noticed that as the years went on and we weren't able to get out as much, that really affected both of us. And now that he's gone, I get outside as often as I can. And I notice if I haven't spent enough time outside. In fact, I went for a 20-minute walk before we did this just because I feel so much better when I'm outside.
I think at the end of the day, we're all going to go through crazy, chaotic, stressful things. Maybe it's caring for a loved one, a spouse, a parent. Maybe it's caring for your children. Maybe it's just caring for yourself. Maybe it's your job. It's a guarantee in life. But I think in those times when we feel the most overwhelmed, the most important thing that we can do is just take the next step and do the next right thing. That's always there in front of us. Just the next moment. Just get through it. You'll live. You lived up to this point. You'll live through this hard thing, whatever it may be. Um, take a deep breath. So I have loved having this conversation. RuthAnn, thanks for um, just discussing this with me. And hopefully, something we said today can help support somebody that's trying to get through the chaos of their life with a little smidgen of peace here and there.
I hope so. That's the purpose in doing all of this.
Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.
Bye.